So I'm delighted, absolutely delighted, to have with us as our keynote speaker William Bell, who is President and CEO of Casey Family Programs. As many of you know, Casey Family Programs is the country's largest national operating foundation with a mission focused solely on providing and improving and ultimately preventing the need for foster care. As a leader for youth who has been intimately involved in public, nonprofit, and philanthropic organizations, Mr. Bell brings tremendous experience and a variety of perspectives to our discussion today. What you all should know about William is that he is passionate and he is relentless in his desire to help some of our most challenged young people in achieving a sense of well-being and permanence and safety in their lives. He has used a variety of tools at Casey Family Programs, including the bully pulpit and his incredible speaking ability. Don't want to raise the bar too high here, William, but do need to mention, although he may not do it today, that I actually was in an audience in Los Angeles where William not only spoke eloquently, but sang to the audience also about the work at hand. But no singing today, got a quick acknowledgement of that. But the point being that William will do anything to raise the issue, make the point, and make a believer out of the people in front of him, that this is some of the most important work we can do in our society today. I give you William Bell.
Good morning.
Morning.
Shay really has raised the bar pretty high, but there will be no singing, I guarantee you. Let me start by saying thank you to Shay and to Kathy and the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform and Georgetown Law Center for inviting me to speak with you this morning on a subject that really has been a part of my professional life for something approaching 30 years. It's hard for me to think about it in that context, but it has also been a part of who I've been, I would just say, all of my life. The connections between social justice for children and foster care and the circumstances that put our children at risk of being in foster care are indeed profound. And I come at this from a number of different perspectives, and I'm going to take my watch off because all you need to do is give me a microphone, and there's no telling how long we'll be sitting here. But from a number of different perspectives, as we think about this concept that we talk about as social justice for children. I arrive at this as a child of the 50s and 60s in rural Mississippi, where it was painfully evident to me that somehow the needs of other children and the opportunities that were afforded to other children were somehow missing from my world, and which raised a number of questions for me, mainly the question of why. Why can't I? Don't I feel? Don't I cry? Don't I need? Am I not the same? And I come at this from the perspective of a young caseworker in the early 80s in New York City, working in a foster care and child abuse prevention program. A young individual who, at the point that I arrived there, had considered a path of medicine, in that I was going to be a renowned doctor, helping to mend bodies. And yet I found myself in a place where I was being called upon to mend hearts, to mend minds, to mend relationships, to help people to think differently. I come at this from the perspective of a young commissioner. I keep throwing in that word young because every time I look in the mirror, this gets kind of gray. But a commissioner of child welfare in one of the toughest cities in I was going to say the country, but probably the world, in dealing with this particular issue. A city where not everybody believed that the people that we were seeking to serve, the people that we were seeking to lift up, deserved to be served, deserved to be lifted up. And it raised a question of who had we become as a society in this great nation that we call America. Who were we? I come at this from the perspective of a CEO in an operating foundation in philanthropy, a place where I've made many new friends, where I can't walk in many rooms without someone knowing who I am. It reminded me of a gentleman who serves on a board with me, and he's a program officer in a grant-making foundation. And see, I have a card in my pocket that says I'm an operating foundation. But he talked about having watched some of the distinguished people in his community and wanting to be like them, and somehow ended up being a program officer for this grant maker. And he walked in the room, and one of those people were there, someone that he had longed to meet for some time. And he finally made his way to this gentleman and said, "Hi, I am," he said, and the gentleman looked at me and said, "Oh, I know who you are." And it's a question of, who are we? Where are we? I mean, I come at this also from a perspective of a board member of a grant-making foundation, the Marguerite Casey Foundation. And it is melding all of those perspectives that drives me to really ask myself some questions. What role do I play as a member of philanthropy? What role does William Bell play? What role does that little boy from Mississippi play in pushing this conversation on this topic and this concept that we call social justice, which really is different in different minds? I would imagine that if we go across this room where there should be significant commonality as we speak about this, we will also find significant difference as we frame this concept. And so today, as I talk to you, it's really from a melding of all of these perspectives that has led me to question myself, question this country, question the intent of so many different institutions, but never to question the desire of one who does not perceive themselves as having justice, never questioning their desire to have that, even though they may not fully comprehend what that really is. But they do understand that it is something that they have yet to attain. And so when we talk about philanthropy, it's probably largely because of the independent and well-financed probably before last October, but well-financed nature of philanthropy, that it has been deemed to be uniquely positioned to lead this conversation about, in an entrepreneurial way, around the support for the advancement of a civil society, advancing a more just society, advancing a society that is better for all of us. And there are some key considerations that every philanthropic organization needs to focus on if it is going to carry out that charge. And one of those keys is having strong partnerships with the nonprofit sector to meet the challenges of experimentation and replication of innovative strategies. Now, a unique difference in being a member of an operating foundation is that we work on these every single day. We have people who are seeking to implement them, but what we have come to understand at Casey Family Programs is that as much as we want to see a different foster care situation in this country, as much as we want to see children really be given the opportunity to succeed even when they can't be raised by their own parents, we can't do that by ourselves. Even though we could finance it, it would not be prudent to finance that in isolation. And one of the things that I've come to learn about Casey Family Programs is that for a lot of years, we operated in isolation. We ran direct foster care for long-term foster care purposes, and we were the best in our own minds. But then we step back and ask ourselves the question, well, let's take a look at the outcomes of those children that we have been the best at caring for, and what we learned was staggering. We learned that while the outcomes in adulthood might have been slightly better than those of children coming from public welfare systems, they were not what we would have intended with all of the investments that we were making in the lives of those children. And it suggested to us that we needed to step back and rethink who we thought we were. And in rethinking who we thought we were, we began to understand that if we don't approach this work from a perspective of the collective, that we're not going to be successful, no matter how much resources we may have, no matter how long and storied our history might be at this work. And I would suggest that we all, not just philanthropy, but not-for-profit and all of our interested stakeholders need to take a step back and ask ourselves the question, who do we think we are? What do we think that we're doing? And what do the results say about what we think? And another key is maintaining an unwavering grounding in the values and the principles that describe who you are. It's one thing to speak about values and act differently. But when your actions and your values are in line, the results will demonstrate that. And we are great at identifying these huge value propositions that elevate the importance of what we say. But I want us to keep pushing for an answer to the question of, but what are we doing? We need to, as philanthropy, continue to have a clear grounding in the original intent of the entrepreneurs who funded us. One of the things that I've come to understand as I think about the late Jim Casey, the founder of UPS, who is also the founder of Casey Family Programs and the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and Casey Family Programs founded the Marguerite Casey Foundation, all from the perspective of this gentleman who had attained riches beyond his wildest imagination. And yet he had a keen eye to look at those who he interacted with and say, something is different about their opportunities and my opportunities, and I need to do something to change that. And so he said, let's move in this direction. But the thing that happened with Casey Family Programs was that after years of moving in what we thought was that direction, we realized that we were not being entrepreneurial enough. And that in fact, was really who Jim Casey was. Someone who innovated and changed based on market conditions, someone who understood what was going on in his environment and made the necessary adjustments to continue to be relevant. And we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, are we relevant? Are we having the impact that we desire to have? And once we've begun to ask ourselves those questions, we've got to be willing to accept the answers. And we've got to be willing to have the courage to stand and to sometimes stand apart when it becomes absolutely necessary to do so. But to not always, even when we're standing apart, always seek to stand together with others. Because none of us will ever be able to achieve these lofty ideals of something called social justice trying to do it alone. And so what I want to spend the rest of my time talking to you about this morning really is this notion of standing together. This notion of standing together around this question of advocacy. And standing together around this question of whether or not social justice is possible. True social justice for all members of this great nation. Is it really possible? Now, I happen to believe in Casey Family Programs, and Marguerite Casey happens to believe that not only is it possible, but that it is absolutely necessary if we're ever going to live truly at peace in this nation. Truly at peace with ourselves, truly at peace with the communities that surround us, and truly at peace with this world. Growing up in reaching my adulthood and living out a large space of my adulthood in New York City, I became accustomed to hearing the words, no justice, no peace. And it was always, oh, that's just Al Sharpton. But as I was thinking about this speech, I haven't had the opportunity to ask him what he meant by that, but for me it started to take and resonate in a way that says, if my neighbor gets a harsher response from the criminal justice system for doing something that is absolutely identical to what I got a slap on the wrist for, we really can't be at peace. If there are communities in this nation that are left behind, left out, and not necessarily included in this larger perspective of change, of improvement, but yet my community is safe. My community has 24-hour protection. My community, I get treated with respect when an officer drives by, as opposed to my counterpart in another community who grips his wheel when he sees a police car in his rearview mirror and he knows that he has not done anything. How can we really be at peace when that is the world that we live in? And so we should ask ourselves the question, well, what can we do? And why should we really do anything? And I would ask you to given where I am in this great institution, that if we consider the preamble to the Constitution of the United States of America, the document that spells out the legal framework under which our federal government exists and to serve the people it governs. The preamble ordains and establishes that we, the people, all of us, that among other things, we have to establish justice, that promote the general welfare, and to secure the blessings of liberty for those, not only for ourselves, but for those who will come after us. And all of this in the context of creating a more perfect union. The focus here was on creating a nation that would be better than it was at that time, and that would continue to seek to be better even as it goes into perpetuity. And I take from these words that the suggestion that the betterment of our nation rests at least in part in justice, general welfare, and the general well-being and the blessings of the opportunities that we offer to those who are going to follow us. And I go a step further to the Pledge of Allegiance, written in 1892, and it pledges allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And in the context of these ideals, it talked about an America that was one nation, was an America that was not only undivided, but was indivisible, not even possible that it could be divided. And that it was a nation where liberty and justice were not only the hope of all citizens, but it was absolutely achievable by all citizens. And I ask you the question, is that the America that you live in? Is that the America that you are seeking to see in your lifetime? And, justice for all being a core idea of this democratic philosophy, which ultimately resulted in our founding, should be the driving force in all that we do from a governmental perspective. That we have a government that we should be able to call upon to assure these certain unalienable rights for all citizens. But I go down this path not because I believe that the people sitting in this room don't understand what I'm saying. Not because I believe that you have not spent time toiling over what I'm saying. But I go down this path because I know 500,000 children who don't believe that this justice that we speak about applies to them. I know another 300,000 children, which totals 800,000 children a year in this great nation, who spend their days wondering what happened to me. Not unlike me growing up in rural Mississippi in the late 50s. I don't want you to think I was in like 50, 51. The late 50s and beyond. And I have to pause to consider, what about them? Now that I have achieved this place in my career of heading this institution that we call Casey Family Programs, what do I do? What is my role? What do I think? What do I live? What do I breathe in order to ensure that this justice that we talk about is made available to this vulnerable population? And as I consider those questions, I think about my colleagues in philanthropy, and I ask the question, what must they do? And I say one of the first things that we are charged with doing is to make sure that government fulfills its role. And one of the challenges in doing that, particularly when you sit on a significant amount of resources, that sometimes we might seek to replace government in that role. We can do it better. We can build a parallel system that, in spite of the failings of our government that we have duly elected and given charge to govern us, we need to build a counter system that moves us forward. But I would suggest to you that that is not the role of philanthropy. That is not the role of the not-for-profit. And we also, in philanthropy, need to understand that we do not exist to take our brilliant thinking and change the worlds of people. We exist to help people change their own worlds. And that somehow we need to engage those who we say we seek to help in determining what type of help they really need. And help them to understand that they themselves can lead the charge to change their social condition, if given the opportunity to do so. Philanthropy must be a convener, must use its convening power. We are able to say, will you 15 people come to Seattle? Now, most of you probably wouldn't want to come to Seattle at certain times of the year, because it's dreary, it's raining, it's gloomy. But I believe that at Casey Family Programs can probably get about 15 or 20 people any time of the year to come to Seattle to talk about some issues, because we can pay for you to come. We can make that happen. So we have this convening power, but what are we choosing to do with it? How are we choosing to influence the discussions around what public policy really needs to exist in this nation through that convening power, but not using it to impose our will on anyone else? There's a song that they used to sing during the civil rights movement that said, "He who believes in freedom cannot rest until it comes." And the question is, if we in philanthropy really believe in justice for all, are we resting? And why are we resting? Do we believe that it has come? Do we believe that the representation of Barack Obama in the White House means that justice for all has come? Do we believe that what used to exist when William Bell was a little boy in Mississippi somehow no longer exists in this nation? Do we believe that we are far beyond that time when there were some people who were left out of that for all, that we the people really meant a subset of the totality of the people, not necessarily we all the people? Have we moved away from that, or are we really still sitting in a place where we the people does not necessarily always mean we the homeless? That we the people does not necessarily always mean we the abused children in America. We the people does not always mean we those who have been incarcerated in juvenile justice. We the people does not always mean all. And so for me, philanthropy has to lead the charge in understanding and promoting that we the people means all of our children. And that America has to take on the responsibility of ensuring that every one of its children has this opportunity for this thing we call social justice. And engaging in the public policy debate is not necessarily something new for philanthropy. If we look back historically, the emergency medical system that we have today is directly connected to work done by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And their investments, their toiling, their efforts were fraught with challenges, but they pushed through. And now we are forever different because of the work of philanthropy. Or if you look at the impact that the Rockefeller Foundation has had on healthcare policy in this country, and the benefits that we all reap because they pushed through. But one of the challenges that I would suggest to you in pushing through for social justice for all of America's children is that the receptivity from the larger society for a improved emergency medical system, or the receptivity for the larger society for an improved healthcare system, is quite different than the receptivity from the larger society for giving justice to some of the vulnerable populations that we're referring to. And I would suggest to you that one of or several of the dynamics that may contribute to that different receptivity has to do with the population that we're talking about. There are three characteristics that we need to think about: gender, race and ethnicity, and economics. And what we're talking about here really is a largely female adult population. We're talking about a largely population of color, and we're talking about the poor. And so the question becomes, is America ready to open its doors of justice for this population? Is America ready to do what it did, kicking and screaming in some instances, to open the voting rights to a population that had been denied? Is America, to several populations over the course of our history that have been denied, from women to blacks, is America ready to say there is no child who will be allowed to suffer in poverty, abject poverty, in the richest, well, we used to be, the richest and greatest nation in the world? Is America ready to make that charge? And if it is not, then what is our role and what is our responsibility? And I would suggest to you that the role and responsibility is clear. I believe that our documents really suggest that if our founding documents for this country, that if government is not carrying out the charge that we the people have elected it to carry out, that we the people have an absolute obligation to intervene in government to move them to the place where they begin to act in the way that we have elected them to act. That's that thing that we talk about that's called advocacy. That thing that we talk about that says that we won't rest until you change and become who we have elected you to be. That thing that says that it is government of the people, for the people, and by the people, and that we are still the people. And that we call on you elected officials to speak as we believe, not as your partisan politics believe, but to speak as we have elected you to speak, and to take us to this place of prominence that we all deserve to be, because we are citizens of this great nation that we call the United States of America. Now, the challenge is moving beyond gender, race and ethnicity, and economics, moves into what I talked about earlier, which is the larger society's aversion to necessarily including all of us. And then thirdly, we are stuck in this situation where shrinking economic base becomes a huge challenge. Because once the economic base starts to shrink, then those necessary partners of government, philanthropy, not-for-profit, and communities sometimes find themselves in conflict. And not because we don't still believe that there's some connection in where we want to go, but we're in conflict because survival mode has kicked in. And when survival mode kicks in, I may sit in philanthropy and say, I want to hold you more accountable for those scarce resources that I'm now giving you. Or I may sit over here with my not-for-profit hat on and say, well, you know, philanthropy, you need to take more of your resources and invest them in what I'm doing, because I am your arm in the community. And government says, I got to cut my budget. I got to cut programs. I got to let go the safety net because I can't afford to keep it going. And then we end up now fighting over something that is quite different than what we actually intended to deal with, which was the absence of social justice in our society. And so I would say that the role of philanthropy is to step up. One of the things that we have chosen to do at both Casey Family Programs and at Marguerite Casey is not to cut back on funding. Even though we have lost considerable on our base in terms of the endowment, but we understand that this is a time when you have to do more, even when it is painful, lest we lose the progress that we have already begun to make. And philanthropy has to be the convener, it has to be the partner with all of these sectors, and we have to be a voice that is used to elevate the needs of people, but not only to elevate their needs, but to elevate them. And in doing that, I believe that one of the things that we need to encourage philanthropy to do, and I'm saying we, me included, is that philanthropy needs to begin to think about an integrated response to the issues that we face. And an integrated response, I mean, we need to move away from our historical siloed responses that mean that Foundation X and Foundation Y and Foundation Z can print their separate annual reports each year and talk about all the wonderful things that they've done to change society. Well, in an integrated response, X, Y, and Z are coming together to talk about what we have done. And an example of how this might make a difference in how we live, I think can easily be found if we were to step back and take a look at the philanthropic response to Hurricane Katrina and the rebuilding effort there. No doubt that we can do some research and come up with a long list of foundations and nonprofits and others who have contributed to the rebuilding of New Orleans. And you can find millions of dollars that have been spent. But yet, the reality is the Ninth Ward is still not rebuilt. The reality is there's still children and adults separated and living across this country and not in their homes in New Orleans, while at the same time this little town in Greensburg, Kansas has virtually been rebuilt as a model green city after being completely devastated by a tornado that happened after Katrina. I really ask myself, I don't want to ask anybody else because I'm sure you don't know, but I really ask myself, why is this the case? But one of the things that I would say that if philanthropy had taken an integrated response to Katrina, if philanthropy had walked in and said, the heads of each foundation that was going to give into that rebuilding effort, if they had walked in and said, government of New Orleans, government of Louisiana, FEMA, sit down with us. And we want to say to you that we've got X millions of dollars for housing. We've got X million of dollars for education. We've got X million of dollars for bringing people back home. And we've got X millions of dollars for these other 5 areas. How can we collectively use those millions of dollars to have a stronger, more permanent response to the issues that have been created for us by Katrina? If we in philanthropy are willing to move beyond those walls that separate us into an integrated conversation about how we will collectively change the opportunities for all children in America, I believe that where we will end up will be a far better place than the one that we sit today. And there are people who believe that we're somehow prohibited from engaging in true advocacy, that philanthropy cannot do that. I would ask each of you to, and when you get a chance, go to margueritecasey.org and look to see the mission and the description of the goals of this foundation. Here's the mission. The mission will tell you that it is to create a movement of working families advocating on their own behalf for change. Advocacy is in the mission. It is goals of supporting and nurturing strong, vibrant activism within and among families, enabling them to advocate for their own interests. To examine, change, and inform the advancement of social and economic policies and practices that promote the development of strong families and strong communities. To encourage the development of a coherent knowledge base for advocates, families, and other organizations that they serve. To invest in systems change and across system change in order to generate knowledge and provide effective working models for practice. That's who we say we are. And we live out that by funding infrastructure. We live out that by making sure that our grantees are people who are engaged in ensuring that the voices of the people are being elevated, not the voices of the not-for-profit, but the true voices of the people are being elevated, and that people are being prepared to actively engage in changing their own futures. Last September, we held a convening of 10,000 families that actually turned into about 15,000 families simultaneously in a campaign in Birmingham, Alabama, Chicago, Illinois, and Los Angeles, California. And the whole purpose of that convening was to have the families ratify a platform that says, here's what the government needs to do for us to help us change our economic conditions. And just recently, members of those families were on Capitol Hill talking to elected officials saying, you need to help me do X, Y, and Z. And here's how I believe you can actually get this done. Here are the policy areas where I think that you need to focus, and this is a change that we demand. And I use that term demand because someone once said that power concedes nothing without a demand. And I believe that it is our role to begin, our meaning me in philanthropy, but also meaning those of you who are in not-for-profit sector, those of you who are students, those of you who are members of the communities that are affected by these conditions that I'm referring to. It is our role to begin to open the doors so that our children, our posterity, those who come after us, can truly receive this thing that we call justice. And, you know, it's been more than 30 years for me walking down this path. And I'm reminded of Dr. King speaking to a crowd in Chicago in 1968, shortly before his death. And he said that he was tired of marching. He said that he was tired of marching for something that should have been his at birth. He said, I'm sure we all get tired sometimes, and I know that the families and the children that we talk about and we advocate for get tired. I know that children in foster care are tired. We all get tired of fighting sometimes, but when we find ourselves continuously fighting for something that should have been handed to any child who is born in America, there's a challenge that we all have to face. But what inspires me is that despite Dr. King saying he was world weary, he kept on marching. He kept on pushing, and he kept on demanding, and he kept on hoping, and he kept on dreaming. And he knew that he couldn't let up and that he couldn't give up, that the price he knew would have to have been too great for society, and that injustice of any kind undermines democracy and destabilizes our society. The price is too high. And the price is too high when 800,000 of our vulnerable children travel through our child welfare system every year. The price is too high when 1.3 million juveniles are arrested each year in this society. The price is too high when 900,000 teenagers in this country become pregnant every year. The price is too high when a young man born today, just because he's born into a certain family, in a certain zip code, in a certain neighborhood in this country, has more than twice the likelihood that he will be incarcerated in his lifetime than a young man born in a different family, in a different zip code, in a different neighborhood. Warren Buffett, the investment wizard and philanthropist, said, someone is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. That's the role of philanthropy in public policy. The role of philanthropy in public policy is to be about planting trees of justice, to be about planting trees of policy change so that someone who is not yet born, someone who may never know the name William Bell, will one day be able to bask in the shade of a changed America, because we were willing to stand, because we were willing to stand apart, because we were willing to say, this is not right, and I will use everything that I have within me to change it, because I believe in freedom. And because I believe in freedom, I will not rest until it comes in the form of justice for all, for every child in America. God bless you, and thank you for listening.